What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Eiger Sanction, which premiered in New York half a century ago. The movie stars and was directed by the legendary Clint Eastwood. And for anyone who's excited about seeing Tom Cruise jumping out of planes later this week in Mission Impossible, I think you'd be equally thrilled by, if not more so, by the incredible stunt work by Clint Eastwood, climbing mountains and cliffs and all kinds of crazy shit throughout this amazing movie.
Clint Eastwood, the man. Eiger, the mountain. A deadly combination. Sanction, a violation of the law to enforce the law.
One of our agents has been killed in Zurich by two men. We want you to sanction them.
Killing?
It is what you do best.
But because I'm hoping to persuade a few people to watch this movie for the first time, and I have it right here on Blu-ray, courtesy of the fine folks over at Kino Lorber. I strongly recommend that Blu-ray, but because I'm hoping to convert the unconverted, I'll be going spoiler-free initially, and then I'll include a verbal warning as well as a time code below for when I go into any details more specific to the plot. In any case, if you're a little on the young side of things, you might be asking yourself, what the hell is the Eiger Sanction? And here's all the relevant info straight from the pages of Wikipedia. The Eiger Sanction is a 1975 American action film directed by and starring Clint Eastwood, based on the 1972 novel The Eiger Sanction by Trevanian. The film was about Jonathan Hemlock, an art history professor, mountain climber, and former assassin once employed by a secret government agency who is blackmailed into returning to his deadly profession for one last mission. And I should also add that the name Trevanian is actually a pseudonym for the writer Rod Whitaker, who is a film professor who actually moonlighted as a novelist of what a lot of people condescendingly refer to as airport fiction. And I have no problems with reading airport fiction. I love reading airport fiction. I've read, hundreds of pounds of airport fiction in my day, but I've never read this particular book. All my knowledge about the book comes from the commentary track by Justin Humphreys on this Blu-ray. And I should also add that if over the course of this video, by some stroke of luck, I managed to make any thoughtful or insightful observations about this movie, most likely I'm plagiarizing or stealing the points outright from Justin Humphreys. His commentary track on this Blu-ray is absolutely fantastic, and as a film historian, I'll be hunting down more of his work in the future.
I didn't actually kill him, you know. Well, I probably won't actually kill you.
But it's funny, I watched this movie several times getting prepared to do this video, but I hadn't really thought about or talked about the Eiger Sanction in decades prior to seeing it on a calendar where I saw basically that the 50th anniversary was coming up in the very near future. I was like, let's revisit it and see if we want to do an anniversary review. But I saw bits and pieces on TV as a kid, and then I saw it on VHS, pan and scan, like the crummiest version possible in the late 90s. And I thought it was perfectly fine and entertaining at the time, but I basically put it out of my mind for more than a quarter century, because when it comes to discussing Clint Eastwood, obviously people like to talk about, like the Dollars trilogy, like the movies that really turned him into one of the biggest stars in the world, or they like talking about the Dirty Harry films, because in the 1970s, Clint Eastwood was a strong contender for the biggest box office draw in the world. And also throughout the 1970s, he was transitioning or switching into becoming a full-blown filmmaker. He learned a lot from Sergio Leone, and he learned a lot from Don Siegel, and he credited both of them at the, I think at the end credits or at the beginning. I can't remember if it's the beginning or the end, but anyway, in Unforgiven, he credited his two teachers for teaching him how to be a director. But in the 1970s, he was a full-blown fucking superstar, and he had a few movies under his belt. And some might argue that if Don Siegel had directed this movie, it might be more famous or more well-known, because even for Clint fanatics, this movie's kind of a tough movie to define, because on one hand, it's trying to be this really mean and nasty, kind of pulpy assassin story. And on the other hand, it's trying to be kind of like a good old boy, lighthearted Clint Eastwood vehicle.
Want a beer?
You gonna call room service?
We got beer.
You haul beer up this rock, you're insane.
I may be insane, but I'm not stupid. I didn't carry it. You did. It's in your pack.
Funny, like when it comes to flawed movies or inconsistent movies, sometimes they're more fun to discuss than like the quote-unquote perfect movies, because when you're discussing a perfect movie, you just constantly say, oh, well, the direction was excellent, the writing was excellent, the performances are excellent, the music was excellent. It gets a little one note in your praise. But when you have a movie that's kind of a mess in a lot of ways, it gives you many toeholds, to borrow a phrase from climbing, as like jumping off points for discussion. And each time I watch this movie, I find it a little bit more interesting because the stunts are fucking unreal. And obviously, movie stars have been doing stunts going back to the beginning of movies. You can see Douglas Fairbanks doing stunts in the 1920s, or Buster Keaton doing stunts, or Harold Lloyd, or whomever. And obviously, up to the present day, you have maniacs like Tom Cruise, jumping off skyscrapers and that sort of thing. But I love it when a star's willing to risk life and limb doing some really crazy shit. And Clint Eastwood trained like a motherfucker getting ready for this movie. But in spite of the fact that the book was a massive bestseller in the early 1970s, this movie wasn't really a big hit. It had a budget of $9 million, and it only grossed $14.2 million worldwide, and Clint Eastwood rarely discusses it, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Perhaps he's unsatisfied with the final product, but also there's a stuntman or a mountaineer, a climber, who died during the making of the movie, and it troubled Clint Eastwood so much he considered shutting down the film entirely. And it's just a horrible accident. From my understanding, obviously I wasn't there, but my understanding is that a lot of people had gone home from the day from the Eiger. They'd flown home on helicopters, and there were a few climbers left on the cliff or on the hill, or however you want to describe it, and there was a rock slide. And for people who are interested, the mountaineer who died was David Knowles, who was 27 at the time. But apparently he had climbed the north face of the Eiger several times before, but while he was working with Mike Hoover, who was the person who trained Clint Eastwood and got him into shape for this movie, he was hit by falling rocks. So it was a horrible tragedy. And when Clint talked about shutting down the movie, a lot of the fellow climbers were like, but then his death will have been in vain. We have to continue. But once again, the climbing community, the mountaineering community is a big fan of this movie because you're looking at all this old footage from 50 years ago where in the absence of CGI, in the absence of AI, in the absence of any kind of modern day tricks, you're watching real climbers with old technology doing incredible things. But my understanding is that Clint Eastwood has some ambivalent feelings about this movie. But the author of the book has no ambivalent feelings whatsoever. How did he describe it? There's a line that I heard in the commentary track. All right, so I found it right here. Trevannion, a.k.a. Rod Whitaker, scorned the movie as vapid. And I have not read the book, so I can't do a proper compare and contrast. But the commentator on the Blu-ray has read the book and seen the movie. And the way he describes the book, it's much more savage and nasty. The character of Dr. Jonathan Hemlock, that's a great name for an assassin. The way you see him in the early scenes when he's talking to his class.
If we've learned nothing else this year, I hope you've learned the stupidity of the statement that art belongs to the world. Because art belongs to the cultured who can appreciate it.
That has much more in common with the character from the book. But in the movie, Clint Eastwood, he's all smiles, got the good eyes, got that 1,000-yard, Clint squint, as I like to describe it. The Clint squint is totally perfected by this point in his career in his mid-40s. But there's a lot of joking around with the character played by George Kennedy. And there's a lot of, let's just say, rambunctious sexual humor scattered throughout.
Oh, God, my. All right, beat it, Buns.
I mean, Clint Eastwood, he gets laid a lot in this movie, and women kind of fling themselves at him periodically throughout the film. And I have a feeling that all those scenes are pretty inconsistent with the tone of the book, where it sounds like the book's just kind of a mean and nasty piece of work, and maybe I should read it at some point. Once again, I do not look down my nose at airport fiction. But
Target is male. He is an accomplished mountain climber.
What's his name?
We don't know. We know which mountain he will climb. The Eiger.
From the suspenseful international bestseller, The Eiger Sanction. Every character brought vividly alive.
If you ever come near me again, I'm gonna kill you.
Jonathan Hemlock, collector of art and women. Mountain climber. An expert at sanctions.
all right, so I feel like I might have accidentally drifted into spoiler terrain already just out of my zeal and my enthusiasm for the movie, so I'm going to go ahead and offer my verbal warning now, but watch the trailer. It tells you all you need to know. It's a wildly entertaining movie, and while I'm not going to place it on the level of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Dirty Harry, or Unforgiven, or any like the really famous Clint Eastwood movies, but Clint Eastwood's been making shows and movies since like the early mid-50s. He's been working for like 75 years almost in entertainment. Not every show or movie is going to be made equal, but across that incredible career, he's had a lot of peaks and valleys and a lot of incredible movies, and a lot of good ones have kind of slipped through the cracks, and I feel like even if we can agree that this movie's not on the level of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly or Dirty Harry or whatever your favorite Clint Eastwood movie might be, it is still a fantastic movie and well worth hunting down.
A spy network being run by a bloodless freak who can't stand light or cold.
Or germs. Are you healthy?
Shall I turn my head and cough?
But as you watch the movie, and it has a very clear 3-act structure, the movie seems to be pulling the story in a lot of different directions, and including the character of Dr. Jonathan Hemlock. His characterization, if you wanted to be charitable, you could say, oh, well, he's a multi-dimensional character. He contains multitudes. Or you could say they didn't quite know what to do with the character versus like the character from the book versus the screen persona of Clint Eastwood. But also the movie's being pulled in different directions because it's got this very clear 3-act structure. And I like the second act and the third act quite a bit. The second act is basically all the training sequences out in Monument Valley that are fucking gorgeous. I mean, Monument Valley obviously has been made famous by a lot of different filmmakers, most notably John Ford. Then the final act is the actual Eiger Sanction, the mission up on the mountain. But in the first act, we get to see the meanest and nastiest side of Jonathan Hemlock as he's kind of pulled out of retirement against his will by his old boss Dragon to perform a few more sanctions before they close the books on his career.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to get somebody else to do your wet work.
Please, that is a distasteful phrase.
But I love the fact that Dr. Jonathan Hemlock has so many different vocations and former careers. I mean, he's a former assassin, a former mountain climber, a passionate art lover, very condescending towards those people that he deems to be less cultured than himself. However, he also likes to drink things like wild turkey on the rocks. Like, once again, he's got so many different contradictions where you can't quite tell. Is he a snob? Is he sophisticated? Or is he a good old boy? And then, of course, he loves the ladies. And if you like seeing Clint Eastwood getting it on with beautiful women, I'll say this. A lot of people criticize this movie for being totally anti-PC, even by the standards of the 1970s. If you've ever been offended by kind of like macho behavior in a movie ever, this is probably not going to be the movie for you. But if you've ever been delighted by, behavior that might be regarded as, not so politically correct in 2025, well, then this movie is going to make you laugh and laugh hard from start to finish. But the movie secretly has like a progressive streak.
You don't have to do everything he says. After all, this is a chance to strike back at the white man.
Or let's just say it's got some surprises because while the movie might be littered with a variety of jokes at the expense of some female characters who you could charitably describe as having a stick up their ass.
In your opinion, do these men climb to prove their manhood, or is it more a matter of compensating for inferiority feelings?
Lady, why don't you go get yourself screwed? It'll do you a lot of good.
There are plenty of lines of dialogue and plenty of gags in this movie that might agitate people of a more sensitive disposition. However, the flip side is here's Clint Eastwood, one of the biggest stars in the world at this time, almost single-handedly obliterating any remaining taboos that there might be in the movies about interracial sex scenes, because in the mid-'70s, that was still kind of the final frontier for a lot of people out there. And obviously, Clint Eastwood wasn't doing this all by his lonesome, but it is interesting how just this movie it's more complex than it might appear upon first glance. So let's get into some of the female co-stars in this film. So we got to start with Vanetta McGee, a.k.a. Jemima Brown. I mean, the way she introduces herself and her name, I mean, it's absolutely outrageous.
Now, if you'll just give me your name, I'll report it to the proper authorities when we land.
Jemima.
And I'm Uncle Ben.
I'm serious. That's really my name. Jemima Brown.
But she has a pretty cool filmography to her name. I mean, she worked on Shaft in Africa, The Great Silence, which is one of the great spaghetti westerns by Sergio Corbucci. She worked on Repo Man. What else was she in? Basically, from like the late 60s through like the early mid-80s, she was all over the place. But she's fantastic in this movie, working for the same spy agency that used to employ Professor Hemlock. And then we also have the character of George.
George there will take you on up.
She's a girl.
A lot of people notice that. All right, George, give him a workout, then bring him back for a meal.
George was played by the lovely Brenda Venus, and her character is responsible for getting Hemlock prepared for the mission at hand, and she basically just runs him across every fucking mountain in the desert in Monument Valley, slowly but surely whipping him into shape. But in real life, off the screen, Brenda Venus is, according to legend, the last muse of the great author Henry Miller, who wrote Tropic of Cancer and all those wonderful provocative sexual novels in the 1930s. And so she was one of his muses late in life. And then she was also a bit of like a sexual guru for Playboy magazine. Anyway, Brenda Venus, she wore a lot of hats, but she is phenomenal in this movie. She doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but her character, let's just say, she makes quite an impression on any lusty men or women who might be watching this movie. I mean, Clint Eastwood, when he's making an action movie, he makes them in a pretty straightforward, economical fashion. Not a ton of depth, just a lot of thrills, a lot of great characters, awe-inspiring photography, great music. I mean, John Williams contributed the score to this. John Williams, right around this time, was working on a little-known movie, a little independent flick called Jaws, which is about to turn him into a household name for the next 50 years. But the score that he contributed to this movie is fucking incredible. I mean, yeah, if you're a John Williams enthusiast, it's worth watching this movie just for that. And it's also one of those movies where the poster's so goddamn good, you could almost just release the poster and not worry about releasing the movie. And the poster was designed by John Alvin, and apparently the poster was starting to deteriorate or just disintegrate in recent years, and a collector bought the original, I don't know the proper terminology, he bought the original work of art, restored it, and apparently now the work of art, or the poster, is in very good hands, looked after, well-loved, well-restored. But yeah, you want to talk about the great heyday of hand-drawn illustrations or paintings and movie posters. Goddamn, like this poster definitely deserves to be hanging on the wall of a great museum. But watching this movie now in 2025 is a really fun experience because it makes so many other contemporary action movies feel really, really timid and cautious in contrast. Usually modern action movies, even if the action is just awe-inspiring, in a movie like Havoc, the feature attraction is the action, and the movie doesn't really have that much more to offer. Or these Mission Impossible movies, like I'm not going to go see Mission Impossible on Thursday for the dialogue or for the photography or for the music. I'm just going to see Tom Cruise do crazy things because that is what Tom Cruise does. But with this movie, we have a hell of a lot more going on, and it just shows how I feel like there are a lot of action movies out there right now that have just like a bankruptcy and imagination where you are allowed to insert so many other wild things in there, especially front and center humor, because this movie features George Kennedy as the character of Ben Bowman. And as a little kid, I first discovered George Kennedy watching him in the Naked Gun movies. Like Ethel, he's Leslie Nielsen's buddy in that movie, and he's incredible. And then in college, I saw him in Cool Hand Luke as Dragline.
That's Lucille, you mullethead. Anything so innocent and built like that just gotta be named Lucille.
Achieving immortality, whispering sweet nothings to a girl as she washes the car. But he's an incredible performer. And in the 1970s, he was everywhere, making like airport movies and that sort of thing. And he worked with Clint Eastwood on Rawhide in 1959, but also in the movie Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, directed by Michael Cimino in 1974. And George Kennedy and Clint Eastwood, you can just tell they're in lockstep in terms of their sense of humor, what they want to do in a movie, what kind of atmosphere or sense of camaraderie they want to create on the screen, and they were just born to work together.
How old are you, John? 35?
Give or take.
Uh-huh.
I know what you're thinking, Ben, but I have to go.
You've been to the Eiger before?
Twice.
And you know what it's like?
Ben, I'm going, goddammit.
All right. I did what a good friend's supposed to do. I tried to talk you out of it, right?
And I imagine that it's with their interactions that this movie has the biggest departure from the tone of the books, because Clint Eastwood and George Kennedy, you can just tell they're having so much fucking fun working together, just talking shit about their age or their lack of fitness or who's a pretty girl or who's not. Just every little interaction that they have is just absolutely fantastic. And George Kennedy's definitely got the best one-liners kind of scattered throughout the movie.
Do you mind if my wife has a peek?
Darling, tell him we'll pay for it.
We can pay for it, you know.
Get out of here. Either you friggin' vampires ever touch this telescope, you're gonna need surgery to get it out of your ass.
And it's those kinds of interactions that have earned this movie a reputation as being kind of a tough guy movie. The kind of movie that when you're a little boy, you're walking through like the living room and your father's like, come and sit beside me and watch some of this movie with me. It'll be good for you. Or you watch it with your older brother because you're trying to feel cool, or you discover it through your fraternity. But it's definitely one of those kind of male bonding movies. However, if you're a lady and you like watching this movie, well then give me a shout whenever you're in New York, because you sound like you'd be great company. So I feel like if you can get on this movie's wavelength and not fight it, well then you can have a really, really good time, because once again, stunts, sex, humor, awe-inspiring photography, great music. Like, if you can forgive the inconsistencies in the story and the characterization, there is a ton to enjoy in this movie. And a big part of that is the character of Dragon, played by Thayer David, where in theory he's one of the good guys. He's who Jonathan Hemlock is working for, but he's so scary and so intimidating, you almost don't even need villains in the movie. But he is an albino. He has to avoid light at all costs. And I don't want to go into too many details about Dragon or give anything away, but he suffers from a variety of physical ailments.
Sorry for this, Hemlock, but twice a year my blood must be fully replaced.
With what?
Which make him kind of a figure of sympathy, if not for the fact that he's just so goddamn hardcore. And I know a lot of people sometimes like reject the idea of people with physical impairments being portrayed as villains, but if I were in a position where I suffered from like all the same ailments that the character of Dragon was suffering from this movie, I would be proud to have Thayer David representing me on the screen, because he's an incredibly memorable character.
We know which mountain he will climb.
And?
The Eiger.
North Face, of course.
That is correct. You are familiar with it.
You know I am. I tried to climb it twice. It tried to kill me twice.
And those scenes between him and Clint are fucking awesome. Once again, if you're into spy thrillers, especially a little bit more pulpy, a little bit more campy, you're going to love the character of Dragon. He's absolutely incredible. And that brings me to a point that is actually brought up by the commentator. Hang on, I'm forgetting his name. Justin Humphries. He was talking about John Waters looking back on the 1970s and the way certain villains were portrayed, because there is one very flamboyant gay villain in this movie, and a lot of people will say now, well, you can't portray him that way because that's a negative stereotype, blah blah blah. But John Waters, who is a very gay man, who was gay before it was cool to be outspoken about being gay, but he talks about how he misses a lot of the gay villains of the 1970s, because when it comes to the way they're portrayed on screen these days, every gay character has to be a saint, every gay guy has to be a good guy, every gay guy has to be full of wonderful, admirable qualities. But if you're a gay actor, it's fun to play the villain. Sometimes the villains in a play or a novel or a movie are the most interesting characters on the screen. So whether you're talking about the character of Miles, who's in this movie, who the actor who plays Miles is actually the father of David and Sean Cassidy from the Partridge Family. But whether you're talking about a character like that or a character like Dragon, this albino running this clandestine organization, I just feel like sometimes in an effort to be good, or in an effort to do good, sometimes people accidentally trip over their own feet and are depriving people of really interesting opportunities as actors to play a much wider array of different kinds of characters.
Dragon, you have a talent for describing the indescribable.
All right, so there is one thing from the commentary track which Justin Humphries brings up, which I want to call attention to, because throughout his commentary track, he's constantly apologizing or saying like, all right, well, just once again, if you're not PC, like this movie's probably not going to be the movie for you, because throughout the movie, Clint's like, patting girls on the fanny, or in America the fanny, in Britain the fanny means something different, but patting girls on the American fanny.
Are you busy this evening?
No.
You live alone?
Well, my roommate's gone for the week.
Good. Ed, go on home. Break out the books and study your little ass off. That's the best way to maintain a B average.
Just saying and doing a lot of really, really outrageous things. I mean, there's some lines of dialogue in this movie which I cannot include in this video because I have a feeling my channel would be terminated by YouTube. And as you watch it, you're just like, it's like there are lines here that are like as shocking, if not more so, than something like Blazing Saddles, where you cannot believe what you are fucking hearing.
Off you go. His name is,
That's cute.
Charming.
But the only thing that really annoyed commentator Justin Humphries in the movie was the fact that Dr. Hemlock has this incredibly arrogant, elitist attitude about art, about how art is not for the masses, art is for the cultured, and his character locks his art away basically in a basement. And he'll show it to a girl if he brings a girl home, like he does with Jemima. He brings Jemima home, grills her a steak, and they pour a few drinks, and they admire his collection. It's like 22 different paintings. But the idea of hiding art away and not sharing with the world, that was the one thing that Humphries found to be most objectionable. And I can see his point. I mean, people can choose to clutch the pearls and get up in arms about some of the comedies scattered throughout the movie, but you can tell Humphreys, the one thing he really objects to is the idea of art being hidden away from people who might be stimulated by it or take an interest in it or whatever the case may be. And I have to say, I kind of agree. And apparently that side of Hemlock's character comes directly from the book. It's kind of an attitude that is embraced by the author. It doesn't seem like Humphreys likes the author's style of writing all that much, but once again, I've not read the book, so I cannot speak to that. While I'm on the subject of the Blu-ray, I also want to mention that there's an incredible 8-minute promotional reel on the Blu-ray that is fucking awesome. It's like the entire movie condensed into 8 minutes, and it includes nudity and all sorts of crazy shit. But I don't know where this promotional reel would have been used, apart from perhaps like sending it to exhibitors, like to see if they want to book the movie in their theater. But I've looked far and wide across the internet trying to find that promotional reel online. I cannot find it. So if you want to see this amazing promotional reel, once again, definitely buy the Blu-ray. And also, it's interesting seeing there are a few scenes tucked away in there that did not make the final cut of the movie. There's a lady with glasses who can tell is yet another love in Hemlock's life who did not make the final cut. So, yeah, it's well worth hunting down if you're a fan of the film. But I feel like I've been going quite a bit at this point without offering any real criticism of the movie, and I have one major criticism. Hemlock outsmarts or outwits his adversaries a little bit too easily. He has one major adversary in this movie, the Eiger. The Eiger has tried to kill him twice, as he says, and he had to retreat on both occasions, and now he's trying to take that hill for a third time. I love how he's always kind of casually referring to it as that hill, which is a great kind of laid-back, understated figure of speech.
Let's call off the climb. Tell him you're sick or something.
You know I want another shot at this hill.
But the Eiger is his only real adversary that he has to go up against, because throughout the movie, he's got the character of Pope, played by, hang on, it's one of Clint's buddies, Gregory Walcott, who's in a million Clint Eastwood movies. But he's kind of this bumbling idiot who's like, saying stupid things like, I know karate and things like that. But it's like he is such a clown, and anytime he annoys Clint's just like, will just kind of pop him and take him out. But it's like, why even have him in the movie if Clint's just going to be able to kind of and just knock him over? So I think that's a big flaw of the movie. Really, Dragon's the only real human character that's a real equal for Clint Eastwood when it comes to providing him with obstacles. Because Dragon has this great tactic for getting Hemlock out of retirement. If he doesn't cooperate, that he'll tell the IRS about his paintings, and that the IRS will probably sell off those paintings to the highest bidder. But it's interesting seeing which tactics Dragon employs in order to make Hemlock do his bidding. And I love the way that Hemlock describes Dragon to Jemima in one scene where he basically says that bloodless freak would sell out his own mother if he had one. I mean, yeah, Dragon is a very nasty character. As we see at the very end of the movie, once again, we're in the spoiler territory. At the end of the movie, through no fault of his own, everybody on the trip to the top of the Eiger, they all die except for Hemlock. And Dragon just assumes that Hemlock killed everybody because he could never quite figure out which target was the true target. All he knows is that his target is going to be on this climb and that he's got a limp. But what he really wants is to get to the top of the Eiger. But at a certain point, somebody gets hit on the head with a rock. They die in their sleep. They're trying to bring the body down during a huge ice storm, and they just have like the worst possible luck and the worst possible accident imaginable. And it's even kind of teased at or hinted at by Jemima at the end. Even she's not 100% convinced that Hemlock didn't kill all three of his fellow climbers just as a way of completing the assignment.
You didn't really sanction all three of them, did you?
But as it turns out, it's George Kennedy who is the target of his assignment. And there's a lot of history with all these characters where there's an old friend that saved Clint Eastwood's life and carried him when he had a bullet in him. Miles also used to be an old friend before he became an enemy. And I think that's one of the most interesting parts about the character of Miles, where some people will say, well, Miles is just like, he's just a bunch of negative stereotypes all rolled into one, and he's an objectionable character. But there's also a strange grudging respect that Hemlock offers him, where he does recognize him as a worthy adversary, even if they are planning on ultimately kind of dueling to the death out in the desert. And George Kennedy's character never intended to be indirectly responsible for the death of Clint's friend in this movie. But I think that's what adds this little unexpected depth to this movie, that this person that Clint Eastwood's been joking around with the entire movie turns out to be ultimately his adversary. And you can tell their friendship has been negatively impacted. At the very end, George is like, or Ben is like,
well, maybe someday we'll do some more climbing together.
Maybe.
but they have so many great bonding scenes scattered throughout the movie. Like there's one scene, even though it's the fourth time I watched the movie, I spit my water all over my face or all over my chest while watching it, because at one point Ben asked the character of Hemlock if he's had sex with one of his fellow climbers' wives who's part of their team. And when Clint tells him no, Ben's like, "Are you sure?" And Clint says, "Yeah, well, I think it's something I'd know." And there's something about the way that Clint says, "Well, I think it's something I'd know." I was like, and I just spat all over myself.
What got into John Paul?
A little jumpy, I guess.
You've been jumping his wife?
No, why?
You sure?
Well, I think it's something I'd know. I'll see you later.
But what really solidifies their relationship on screen is all the training sequences, because as it turns out, George is the daughter of Ben Bowman, and George has some very interesting, she has a very interesting way of incentivizing Clint. Like at one point, he's reluctant to climb a particular cliff. She takes her top off, gives him a little Mardi Gras special. He climbs up and she's gone. But there's all sorts of great stuff like that. But at one point, they climb this this giant rock called I think it's called the Totem Pole, but it's on Navajo land. And the way the movie got onto that land, because you cannot climb it, the production, they offered to basically clean up the totem pole and get all the clamps and ropes and all the trash off of it and leave it in pristine condition if they were able to shoot some of their scenes there. And that's one of the best scenes in the movie by far, where Hemlock is climbing great, he's looking great, and he's basically with a rope dragging his friend Ben up to the top. And as it turns out, Clint's had a six-pack of beer in his backpack the entire time. And just seeing those two old friends sitting there on the top of this incredible, I don't know, like pillar or tower, however you want to describe it, and you get this gorgeous helicopter shot of the two of them just sitting there with their legs dangling over the edge. That is some pure, raw, just hardcore, balls to the wall, epic cinema. And it's moments like that where this movie really achieves something special. It's what separates it from your traditional, just kind of generic, run-of-the-mill action movies of the 1970s. And there's just something incredibly visceral and immersive about watching a star really do it. Like there's a great little detail at one point when Clint's pulling himself up onto the top of a rock, and you see him kind of scrape his hand and shake it out, and you just realize this star is really doing it. Whereas you watch so many modern action movies, and they're just on green screens and just interacting with things or props that aren't even there. And yeah, actors need to get out in nature and do some real stuff. And those scenes continue when you get to the Eiger. And what's great about the Eiger is that people can basically, down in this little village with these telescopes, watch the climbers as they climb. And some of them, in a very morbid way, are hoping to see somebody fall. But Clint's got all kinds of great footage up there. Like there's this one great scene where he's kind of swinging back and forth on a rope, getting some momentum going before he goes for a big handhold. Forgive me for my lack of terminology. I've done very little climbing. The only climbing I've done since high school, I go to the climbing wall like once a year over at my gym, Chelsea Piers here in New York, and I will climb the beginner course a few times, whereupon I'll be screaming in agony and I'll have to come down. But yeah, I am not a climber and don't really know what I'm talking about. But I love all the interactions between Clint and his fellow climbers, because you have a German, an Austrian, and a Frenchman, and all of them basically come across like Bond villains that Roger Moore would have been fighting in movies like The Spy Who Loved Me. But as we all know, Ben Bowman is the assignment. None of these climbers are actually like the target of Dr. Hemlock. But because we the first time through suspect that they might be, they all seem to be filled with malice and danger, and the tension of the film really starts to escalate, especially with the leader who loves talking shit about how Hemlock, he's not climbed the Eiger twice, he has failed to climb the Eiger twice, and he's constantly kind of putting him down.
Correction, if I may, the good doctor has failed to climb the mountain twice before. I don't want to offend you, Herr Doctor, but I'm forced to say, I don't consider a record of failure automatically grants you the right to lead.
And he keeps climbing ahead of the group on the mountain, even when they're in trouble and rocks are falling on them and ultimately end up killing the Frenchman. He seems to have a total lack of regard. All he really wants to do is get to the top. But the Austrian's really cool, and he has this kind of devil-may-care attitude. And even at the very end of the movie, when he knows they're probably all going to die, and he's starting to get some very grim feelings as they're trying to bring the dead body down to this tunnel where they possibly might escape, he says something to the effect of,
I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style.
Now, I want to share a little conspiracy theory that I have, or just a theory, and I would never accuse Steven Spielberg of any outright plagiarism, but hear me out, because Steven Spielberg and Clint Eastwood, they were both working for Universal at the time, and both Jaws as well as the Eiger Sanction were produced by David Brown and Richard D. Zanuck. So I think it's safe to say that there's a good chance that Spielberg was at least invited to the premiere of the Eiger Sanction, or saw it, or had access to it. There are two moments in the Eiger Sanction that are almost verbatim, like lifted or recreated in Raiders of the Lost Ark only a few years later. Because early on in the movie, we see Dr. Hemlock, or Professor Hemlock, Dr. Hemlock, talking to his students, and the girls in the crowd have a big crush, and they're like, drawing in their books and whispering sweet nothings about him, and you can tell they have a huge crush, very similar to the girls who have written love you on their eyelids in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then also, once the actual ascent on the north face of the Eiger begins, there's an incredible shot, which is very reminiscent of the silhouette shot when Indiana is trying to get into the Well of Souls, and you have that, he's putting on the hat. It's iconic, but there's a very similar scene in the Eiger Sanction. So, I think Spielberg, if he saw this, or if some of his collaborators saw this, they took inspiration from it. And if you're going to borrow, why not borrow from Clint Eastwood? If Clint Eastwood had been 10, 15, maybe 20 years younger, he perhaps would have been Indiana Jones instead of Harrison Ford. But by the time that movie came out, Clint Eastwood was about 50 years old. He'd aged out, but once upon a time, Clint Eastwood would have been a very worthy rival to Harrison Ford, but they were just different generations. But I'm starting to realize that I've been ranting and raving for a hell of a long time on my end. I don't think all my rant is going to make it into the final cut of this video, but even though I was a little disparaging about the movie earlier in the video with a few criticisms, any movie that you can talk about incessantly for like an hour straight, something special is going on. I think if you're a Clint Eastwood fan, and if you're not a Clint Eastwood fan, what's wrong with you? But I think the Eiger Sanction deserves to be mentioned in the same breath with a lot of his other great movies from the 1970s. Like maybe not on the level of Dirty Harry, but I might prefer the Eiger Sanction to a movie like Magnum Force. Is it as good as The Outlaw Josie Wales, which I think was Clint Eastwood's next movie? Maybe not on that level, but probably better than High Plains Drifter and some of the other movies that he made. So I think Clint's he's blessed us with so many incredible movies as a performer and as a director and a producer over the years. He's given us a wealth of options to choose from. But I think the Eiger Sanction has enough great scenes in it, enough great ingredients, that it can compete just fine with just about any of Clint's movies from the 1970s. His 1970s period includes Two Mules for Sister Sarah, Kelly's Heroes, The Beguiled, Play Misty for Me, Dirty Harry, Joe Kidd, High Plains Drifter, Breezy, Magnum Force, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, The Eiger Sanction, followed by The Outlaw Josie Wales, The Enforcer, The Gauntlet, Every Which Way But Loose, Escape from Alcatraz, and then we get into the 1980s. But goddamn, Clint in the 1970s, that's an incredible body of work for just one decade for an actor / director. I think it's safe to say in the 1970s he was really finding a sweet spot and delivering some of the best work of his career. So that's all I'm going to say about the Eiger Sanction. If I don't just make myself shut up, I'm just going to keep talking. So I'm cutting myself off, even if I have a few more things that I'd like to share. But hope you enjoyed this video. If you've never seen the movie before, I hope I've excited your curiosity. Or if you haven't watched it in a long time, I hope I've refreshed your memory and encouraged you to go back and watch it again with fresh eyes. But if you like this video, remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I greatly appreciate you watching, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.